Hello, everybody. This is Craig from the Pacific War Channel. This is Echoes of War. I'm joined here by my co-host, Gaurav. How are you?
Hey Craig, great to be back here. And today is the conclusion of this mini series.
Yes, we're finally going to be concluding the Battle of the Atlantic. But before we jump into it, I just want to remind everybody that if you haven't already joined us on YouTube, we're going to have a lot of maps, a lot of portraits, a lot of visual components to really make this more of a documentary feeling. So please, I implore you to join us on YouTube. And if you'd like to further support the channel, please consider checking out the YouTube membership or the Patreon account at www.patreon.com/the Pacific War Channel. By joining either of these, you get access to the exclusive podcast series. You also get early access to all the content I make and voting rights to subjects I will tackle next. And I'm now realizing, after coming back from the dentist, I have a lisp because they just put a wire in the back of my teeth and I sound ridiculous. But we're going to carry on. And Gareth, why don't you
You
just
don't sound
jump right
that
into
bad.
it? I'm like listening to myself saying things. I'm like, oh my God. But please, Gareth, take us through. And I will going to toss up just a general map of the Battle of the
Yeah,
Atlantic.
sure. Much appreciated. So while Craig brings up the map, let's take a recap of where we were. The Battle of the Atlantic is the single largest campaign of the war. Started literally from the second day of the war with the sinking of the Lusitania, which was sunk by error, mind you, till slightly after the end of the war. It's while the primary theater is in the name, which is in the North Atlantic, we were covering the the Arctic convoy and Mediterranean battles, where the Reggio Marinas realized that you know the clear and shallow waters of the Mediterranean are very easy for Spitfires and other recon aircraft of the British to spot them. And the Arctic convoys, well, Britain recovered pretty spectacularly because in August 1942, a massive convoy loss saw the s- over 100,000 tons of supplies lost. It also included like several hundreds of vehicles and tanks, so it was a pretty big loss. That is the Battle of Convoy PQ-17. But in the Arctic, the decisive blow did come to just after Christmas 1943, the Battle of the North Cape, where the Scharnhorst was defeated by the Duke of York in an engagement that had been planned by Admiral Bruce Fraser, who which also has one ship that is going to be coming in today for a brief moment when Greg does talk about D-Day. And after that, the Arctic convoys were practically secured, and no German force, be it from the Luftwaffe or the Kriegsmarine, would be really threatening the supplies going to Russia. Which I think if you also consider the timing of the event, Russia was also on the offensive against Nazi Germany in the east. It was December 1943, so yeah. I think Kursk and Operation Bagration had already taken place. Now, in the main theater, the Atlantic, Britain not only had started rationing much early into the war, unlike France, for example. Britain actually started its rationing in September 1939. France did not even consider implementing it even during the Battle of France, I might add. And the dig for victory, optimal use of the land in Britain, and focusing on the correct crops ensure that Britain actually was growing more food and becoming less reliant on imports. And over the course of the battle, yeah, they faced setbacks such as the Bismarck sinking HMS Hood, the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau and a few other commerce raiders, the Wolfpack tactics. But Britain recovered. They got lucky with the Battle of U-117, where the destroyer HMS Bulldog's crew managed to recover the Enigma. In several key battles in March and April 1941, many of the U-boat aces were sunk. And with America entering the war towards the end of 1941 and finally adopting to the convoy system and working pretty well with the British, not perfect. Ernest King was a notoriously difficult man to ever want to work with. I think Douglas MacArthur would second me on this.
I think Douglas MacArthur would second any attack on the U.S. Navy.
Well, at least it wasn't as bad as the Japanese in their army and navy. So,
No, that certainly is the worst. Yeah, definitely.
but after the US got into convoys, the Allies did suffer actually a setback in towards the end of 1942, where because of the incoming Operation Torch requirements between October 1942 to Jan 1943, you actually had fewer convoy escorts per convoy than any other time in the war, because a lot of the shipping was directed to North Africa. But the British also made one very good change. Admiral Max Horton was placed in command of Western approaches, that is based in Liverpool. He loved his golf. He would golf all the time during the day and just work at the night. But he was an aggressive commander, utilized his escort groups much better. And with commanders like Donald McIntyre, Frederick, Johnny Walker, these guys were sub killers. Just these two commanders sunk, I think, around 15 to 16 U-boats in the war together. Oh, I think it's a bit more. I'm not sure of the exact number, but I think 3 to 4% of the entire U-boat force of the war was sunk by these two men. The mid-Atlantic air gap was closing, and by May 1943, the U-boats are in full retreat. They, because the gap is, as you can see, where we have this dark area, it was closing because Coastal Command got more B-24 Liberators. You had more Catalina flying boats, more Sunderland flying boats. They had great radar. The ships were now equipped with ASDIC. And more importantly, you had the Hedgehog come to. Now, because anti-submarine warfare weapons improved so much because the depth charge isn't that great, unfortunately. Ratio was immense. Correct. The uh, It took about 60 depth charges to sink a submarine. Do you know how many volleys of the Hedgehog it used in comparison?
How
Five.
many volleys?
5 volleys of the Hedgehog. And
Yeah, it's a
one
significant
of the
improvement.
important, one of the biggest advantages of that was actually it fired forward. It did not fire like underneath. That was the biggest shortcoming of the depth charge. Right, so the submarine could escape. Now, D-Day, and by now the Germans are, focusing solely on the Mediterranean theater and the Atlantic theater. They've completely withdrawn from the Arctic convoys. Now, after the destruction of the Scharnhorst and the Tirpitz being the eternal ship that never wants to engage, Dönitz and Hitler said the new generation of U-boats was needed, which Dönitz is like, yeah, buddy, it's now probably too late. Because unlike the Führer, Grand Admiral Dönitz actually had, realistic, a realistic outlook to life, you could say, in comparison. And this is where the new program to develop the Walter U-boats did take place, which were to have much higher speeds underwater. U-boats were agonizingly slow underwater. Their surface speed is about 17 to 18 knots, which was actually faster than most of the destroyer escorts, like these various corvettes and tugboats, which could make maybe say 14 to 15 knots. They're no match for a destroyer, that's for sure, because destroyers could go to what, 30, 32 knots. But the submerged speed of most U-boats, especially the Type 7, is the workhorse U-boat, their underwater speed was 7 knots. And they had a limited endurance for being underwater. They definitely could not stay more than a day. This new U-boats were going to be powered by hydrogen peroxide propellant, and what they just decided to do while this was going on is they converted the U-boat propulsion to the electro boats, which is just kind of modifying the existing batteries that were used underwater. So instead of getting a complete redesign, you're just trying to improve on an existing one. And this was actually seen with the Type 21 U-boat, which saw about 118 out of the 1,000 or so U-boats that were completed being this type. And unfortunately, these U-boats, despite their promise, would actually never serve. The Type 21, only one out of the 118 that was completed left for a combat patrol.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so the Type 22 just just ignore it. It did not exist.
It's like the Shinano for the Japanese.
Oh yeah, but they were the most of the other existing U-boats. The most important thing is they actually gave them the snorkel by turn of 1944. This allowed the U-boats to actually end up running their diesel generators while underwater and recharge their batteries. So greatly did improve their underwater endurance, though it definitely did not solve the speed issues. The U-boat's primary hunting. Greg, do you have the picture of towards the central, like towards? Can you go down towards the Mediterranean? No, towards the Mediterranean. Is it not in this image?
No, one second. I'll get you a
Um,
Mediterranean map.
no, just Atlantic and Mediterranean. I think you have one of the map with the air gap would be pretty good. So they decided to move towards convoys that were going towards the central Mediterranean because that was also a direct route for the Americans to supply their forces in Italy, right? Because right now, I think you would be having the main Italian land campaign where General Mark Clark is trying to up my boy General Harold Alexander, and this
Yes, he
it is
is.
also coincidentally this is also the time of Anzio, so you have a pretty big landing taking place. Just I think what Anzio was about 30 kilometers from Rome, something. It was pretty close.
Yeah, it's very close. Very close.
Yeah. So they actually decided to try to focus on this, thinking the North Atlantic convoys will have all the protection. They can target, call it a soft underbelly, if I was quoting Winston Churchill, just out of Europe. And the Ultra works. Ultra is pretty useless in giving you quick intercepts. But if you have a long term strategic intercept, that's way more valuable. The Allies learned of this through intelligence, and three naval task groups with escort carriers were in this region. And these carriers did not work as just like the primary escort that would just be going with the convoy. They were part of they were operating like this hunter killer groups, like what Commander Johnny Walker would actually be commanding. They had permission not only to support a convoy, but search and destroy. And in a few missions, uh, one merchant ship and several convoys was destroyed. But at the same time, almost 20 U-boats were destroyed by these escort carriers. That's pretty brutal. Uh, like casualty loss, and this is actually where the until the U-boats could get upgraded for the rest of 1943 in this region, the Wolfpack was abandoned. And at the same time, because the British also got the access to the Portuguese Azore Islands and operate military aircraft, the mid-Atlantic air gap is now becoming even smaller. So this is where Donitz now decided to innovate, and you could say the biggest upgrade he got was the T5. I'm probably gonna butcher the pronouncing. Zaunkönig acoustic torpedoes over the traditional contact pistol magnetic torpedoes used. It is officially called the G7. It is a passive acoustic torpedo, and the acoustic torpedoes are a kind of torpedo that aims for the sound and searching for the use of the sonar of ships to kind of use it, and you know it's almost like a primitive homing missile, you could say. It could turn and navigate, because most German torpedoes, and actually most of the torpedoes that were used even by the Japanese and the British and Americans, they were contact torpedoes with a magnetic pistol. You'll fire them at a range, you will set the speed and depth, and they will just go towards a magnetic surface, which was usually like the ship's hull. And then once they reach, then the hope is it will actually detonate. Considering, as we've discussed, I think in a few previous episodes, the US in the early war had pretty lousy torpedoes.
Oh, yeah.
But the new Wolfpack tactics was also implemented. The idea was they were first ordered to attack convoy escorts with the acoustic torpedoes before going after the merchant ships. In the past, you just go for the sheep, right? Which in this case is your merchant ships. It's kind of inverse. So the first attack, uh, which was actually on convoys ONS 18 and ON 202, 21 U-boats attacked, and at the cost of 3 U-boats, they did sink 6 merchant ships and 3 warships. It was the only success of this new Wolfpack tactic, because afterwards, well, yeah, the casualties were pretty bad. At the end of this tactics set towards which culminated towards the end of the calendar year 1943, well, 8 merchant ships of 56,000 tons were lost, along with 6 warships. But, Craig, I just want you to do me this honor. Guess how many U-boats were lost?
20?
Please go a bit higher.
30?
39.
39. Oh, yeah, it's that's bad.
Yeah. For 6 warships and 8 merchant ships. Considering merchant ships, the US are like getting out Liberty ships as if they were just like, canned goods today. The way it was churning them out by Henry
Yeah,
Kaiser
certainly.
shipyards. And
Certainly Germany, especially at this point in the war, can't afford this.
And at the same time, you have the warships that are going to be sunk are what? At the best, a destroyer, if you're lucky. Most is going to be like a destroyer escort, or maybe a frigate or corvette.
Yeah,
Or if you're very
by
lucky,
late 43, it's not worth it anymore. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. And I think this is a great telltale sign of how bad it was in 1944. 41 patrols were sent out from the U-boat by the U-boats into the Atlantic from France in January 1944. That number fell down to 10 by May. The U-boats were actually moved to the Norwegian fjords because the number of the losses were just unacceptably high. The operational strength of the U-boat arm has now dropped down to 89 U-boats from 120 at the turn of the year in that same time frame of January to May 1944. Remember, Donitz was always gunning for having 300 operational U-boats by 1940, 1941. It's too little, too late. And Craig, now that we've put in the groundwork of what all this happened in the Atlantic, would you like to talk about the naval operations of D-Day? Because that is the defining characteristics of this year on the
Yeah.
seas. Yeah.
So, as I would imagine most audience members know, D-Day, or as it's known, Operation Overlord, was probably, I guess, the single most important operation in the Battle of the Atlantic. The naval aspect of it was codenamed Operation Neptune. Very good name, by the way. Planning had begun, in 1943 under British Admiral Bertram
I'm sorry,
Ramsay,
should I just
who
add? Caligula would have gone insane hearing that there was an operation honoring Neptune.
spear the water. Planning had gone, as far back as 1943 under British Admiral Bertram Ramsay, who was going to be, coordinating an armada of over like 6,000 vessels from 8 different allied navies, but primarily Britain, America, and Canada. The fleet would include 1,213 warships. We're talking battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and smaller craft.
And I think it will also
4,100.
be including the motor gunboats and all that would be helping with the
Yeah, yeah,
shore bombardments, right?
yeah.
And
Your
folks, in
regular
case you
torpedo
don't
boats.
know, Bertrand Ramsey, I would actually say, could probably coordinate amphibious operations and all better than Richmond Kelly Turner.
Okay, that's a bold statement. This would also
Hey,
include,
he is the guy that coordinated Operation Dynamo. He
yeah,
was in charge of the landings and naval operations under Sir Admiral Brown Cunningham for Torch.
Torch as
He
well. Yeah,
commanded he was again a similar role for Operation Huskies. So he does have the credentials. It's not like
yeah. Of course, of course. But also, this would the landing force would include about 4,126 landing ships of many, many different types, thousands of other supporting vessels like minesweepers and merchant ships and such. Obviously, secrecy was paramount for all of this, and there was other operations that were like done to mislead the Germans, such as Operation Fortitude, and I mean there was countless other operations. Famously, there was that operation where Patton was given like a ghost army and stuff, which was a funny one.
But
And
it
the
actually worked because the Germans did genuinely believe that the Pas-de-Calais was the.
yeah, the Germans believed that the attack was probably coming at the Pas du Calais, but I
Not
mean,
bec-
if you look,
I think I think it was more just geography plus pattern that worked hand in
yeah,
hand.
of course, but
Because I think it just maybe reinforced the belief that this was the landing zone.
yeah, but of course, if you look at the Atlantic Wall and the amount of physical manpower that they had, the Germans were really screwed with this, and I mean, like the they also half-assed their defensive plans at the last minute. So, anyways, they were not. It wasn't looking good for them,
I
regardless.
mean,
But
anyways, the Atlantic Wall was what I think it was operated at what at the best like at 50% manpower in the required sectors.
I think it was like a third.
Some
Yeah, something like that. But
I was just meaning like certain sectors were like at 50% overall. I think it was a third.
yeah, assembly occurred in the southern English ports with convoys forming in areas like the Isle of Wight. Weather delays pushed the invasion force from June the 5th to the June the 6th because they had to measure everything as far as tides were concerned. Everything this had to be pulled off perfect conditions. It's very complicated.
Yeah, and if actually they did not do it on the 6th of June, the invasion would literally be delayed for a month because
Yeah,
they
because
had to wait
storms.
for
Yeah,
the. No, not the storms. It was actually they needed the same condition of the moon to
yeah,
be in
yeah,
orbit so that it exerted the required uh, conditions of the tides because what they wanted were clear nights so that the airborne troops have an easier job, and it has to be a full moon to kind of help the gliders
yeah.
and something over the tidal conditions and calm seas. But I just want to add one thing here, and thank you that you have this particular graph. When sorry, map. Shit, I've been working way too much with graphs recently. But the day of the dawn of 6th of June, right? I think at the last minute on the 5th of June, when the 24-hour hold had been put on the invasion and everyone was just hoping that the weather's going to clear up. One of
Yeah.
the meteorologists, he confirms that, all right, he gives Ike and the Supreme Command that, all right, it's going to clear up. And Eisenhower then makes the decision, where go. And luckily, the weather prediction was true, but the Germans did not actually have any radar to really detect. So they actually slackened off on the morning of the 6th of June mostly because they thought that this weather is just, it's not capable, worthy for launching an amphibious operation. And coincidentally, a group of E-boats, right? So they are the German motor torpedo boats. They were just on a patrol and they come in front when the fog kind of clears out. They just see the entire armada of the Allied forces just waiting. And this particular E-boat, like I think the flotilla commander, the guy literally panicked and said that it's impossible. There can't be so many ships in the world because you just have like battleship, as you mentioned, 7,000 warships warships that support ships. But I can completely understand his perspective. And this was actually I read in that same book because that battle was actually talking about just Omaha Beach. Right, so it is the Mammoth Book of Battles by John E. Lewis. And I think one of the assault echelons that was actually going to Omaha, yeah, as you can see, it's Force O. Its bombardment force was actually two battleships and I think about 14 to 15 destroyers. This is not even counting the smaller vessels. So,
Just to help out, maybe I'll toss up
yeah,
this map for a little bit that actually breaks it down a little further.
true. But this was just like the force just supporting Omaha for the shore bombardment, and you had battleships as well. So I just wanted to add
So,
that.
yeah, as for the YouTube members who are seeing this, obviously the naval forces were divided into on the west you had the Americans, east you had the British Canadians for their task forces targeting. It was 5 beaches: Utah and Omaha for the U.S., Gold and Sword would be under the British, and Juneau for the Canadians. Pre-invasion planning before H hour, which is going to be 6:30 for most of the beaches, naval forces were trying to clear a path. So minesweepers are coming in from the Royal Navy and the U.S. Navy, sweeping about 10 channels through German minefields, marking safe lanes with buoys under the cover of darkness. This Spud Pier operation, which that was its code name, was essential as mines posed obviously a severe threat, and several ships would be lost due to them. But the lanes allowed the invasion fleet to safely approach. Allied air and naval reconnaissance had mapped out coastal defenses, but naval intelligence was relying on frogmen, and this is primarily from the British. The British combined operations assault pillage parties. They would swim ashore, gather data, and there would also be diversionary bombardments and dummy fleets to just further confuse the Germans.
Yeah, I think some of these other diversions were actually the dropping of the Ruperts further inland,
Yeah.
which was confused for the real paratroopers. And if I'm not mistaken, even in the prelude to D-Day, the British actually sent a lot of commandos to just gather the sand and soil from the beaches
Yeah.
to actually test the viability for holding the vehicles and all that are going to be coming through in the thousands later.
That's how complex this was, yeah. So
And people actually wonder if Sea Lion could have taken place.
yeah, no, it's God, Sea Lion was such a joke. But as dawn broke, the naval bombardment would commence. It was actually one of the largest naval bombardments in history. 6 battleships, including the USS Arkansas, Texas, Nevada, HMS Warspite,
And
Ramillies, and Rodney.
thank you. I just wanted you to mention Warspite.
Yeah.
No, I just love the Warspite. So
Oh yeah, it's in World of Warships, it's actually one of the favorite ships out there. There's also 23 cruisers who joined in, 70 destroyers to unleash a torrent of shells upon the German fortifications. The goal was obviously to soften up the defenses, destroy gun batteries, create craters for cover and such. At Omaha Beach, for instance, the USS Texas and Arkansas fired about 600 rounds, but it was poor visibility, and the fortified positions, wasn't really easy to destroy them, so it was very limited in effectiveness. But yeah, destroyers would provide closer support, maneuvering perilously close to the shore to try and suppress machine gun nests and German artillery. The HMS Ajax and other ships would engage in duels with coastal batteries, while rocket firing landing craft added to the overall barrage.
I'm
The
guessing,
fire support.
sorry to interrupt. I'm guessing the US hopefully would have also put in some of the lessons it's learned the hard way from the Pacific.
Yep, they definitely would have. Although I think there was only one significant commander who had experience there from the Pacific, but of course they're sharing notes and they know what is effective and what isn't. There was
Yeah,
a
because the only commander I know who operated in the Pacific and then came here was not actually a naval commander, but an army commander,
yeah,
General Collins.
yeah, but still they definitely would benefit from everything they learned in the Pacific. Like for example, I just mentioned the rocket firing from the landing craft. That was something that was developed through the Pacific warfare, and it showed to be extremely useful, especially when the Japanese are putting their defenses at the beaches itself. So, I mean, this is a similar situation, just much more fortified, mind you. The fire support continued post landing with ships like the French cruiser Montcalm, adding Juno to the Juno beach assaults. And a ship shouldn't
I
be
was
named
actually,
after Montcalm because he was a terrible commander. But anyways,
well, I was just actually surprised the French actually contributed a naval vessel.
yeah, on the right side of the battle, not on the other side. But the core
It
naval
always,
action is
sorry, because you just mentioned the French, it's just this big incident that happened, I think, before the breakout out of Normandy. De Gaulle comes ashore to meet Montgomery because until you had the breakout from Normandy, Montgomery held supreme command. That was, anyways, the agreed path, after which Montgomery would retain supreme command of the British and Canadian forces, and the Americans would go to Bradley. And De Gaulle comes and Fred starts criticizing Montgomery for his lack of pace and trying, like, deriding the Allies as usual because they're not doing anything good, blah, blah, blah. And you know how Montgomery is. He just doesn't seem to understand most of these insults or whatever. And good for him, he actually did not know French. And the aide of General Charles de Gaulle, who had to translate de Gaulle's insults into English because de Gaulle doesn't know English, luckily. That aide, he just says to Montgomery, the general wants to thank you for all the effort that the British and Americans have put in, landing this operation and planning to liberate our country from the Germans. That guy, he should have got the Legion of Merit and every award just for avoiding a war between Montgomery and de Gaulle.
Yeah, seriously. De Gaulle, who would go on to be an absolute piece of shit, by the way. And I'm not just saying that as a Quebecois. He ruined this entire province. Anyways, I won't get into the history of that, but De Gaulle is a piece of shit. And I think not just my opinion, many people's opinions. For the core naval action, obviously it's, ferrying and landing over 132,000 troops, on D-Day. Specialized vessels like LSTs, those are landing ship tanks, LCTs, they're all delivering the men, the tanks, and the smaller vehicles directly onto the beaches, with smaller Higgins boats shuffling the infantry. Mulberry harbors, prefabricated artificial ports were also towed across the channel, and then they were assembled on spot, which is incredible when you think about it under fire, to
And
facilitate the supply
they
lines.
had already prepared Pluto pipeline under the ocean, which was going to be pumping like a
Yeah,
50, 60 kilometer pipe from Britain to France, which was just going to be supplying all the oil and fuel required for the Allied ground forces.
it's simply
It's
incredible. Everything is
the
nuts.
so the scope of the tanks and everything that will come later. One British tank commander who served from D-Day till the surrender of Germany in this theater. He said he literally had, I think, 3 or 4 tanks shot out under him, but he never went a day without having a tank because he would just go back to the regimental motor pool and just pick up a new tank. So, but Craig, do you know about the
Mhm.
famous incident involving Bertram Ramsay on D-Day with Churchill and the King?
Oh yeah, well, yeah, but tell the audience I'm aware
Yeah,
of it. Yeah,
yeah. Maybe we could just do it because it's, I think, one of the greatest things of Bertram Ramsay is actually his ability to remain calm under pressure and just manage egos. Because I think he definitely would beat Kelly Turner on just on the not having a quick temper. I mean, not that it's really a contest. Do you want
but
to
do
just tell?
explain. Yeah, explain what
Yeah,
happened with the king. And
yeah. So as Craig mentioned, Admiral Ramsay was appointed to be the naval commander in chief of the Allied Expeditionary Force. Right. Coordinating like literally hundreds of thousands of soldiers across thousands of ships. And just before D-Day, both Prime Minister and Winston Churchill and the King George VI, uh, were at loggerheads. So Churchill informed the king that he intended to observe the D-Day landings from the HMS Belfast, which was on bombardment duty, which was one of the 17 light cruisers that was on bombardment duty. And the king, who was also a veteran of the Battle of Jutland, uh, you know, he said, "Yeah, sure, I would also like to do it, so I'm going to come with you, and we'll observe it from the Belfast together." And the two were civil loggerheads because both of them did not want the other to come. They just wanted to go individually. And then they go to Bertrand Ramsey to kind of like, get him to mediate because, well, he is the guy who's going to make the decision. He just says, I am not taking responsibility for your safety. And then he kind of says, well, if the operation goes bad, we need you both to be there to, stabilize the civil government, plan with the Americans to, how do we react if it goes bad. And he pointed out that Belfast is going to be in a position where German shore batteries can easily target it. It is at risk. Then he also said that the Luftwaffe could also come in. Granted, they only had like what 300 aircraft in France, but well, still technically a risk. And he said, you guys need to stay home and just be prepared for the worst case scenario. And ultimately, both did not go for the bombardment on Belfast.
hey guys, this is Craig from the Pacific War Channel. Please don't forget to check out my YouTube membership or my Patreon account over at www.patreon.com/the Pacific War Channel, where you can join the ranks and gain access to a hell of a lot of goodies. At the base minimum, you get access to the exclusive monthly podcast, early access to all of my content, voting rights for what subjects I will tackle next, and at higher tiers, I have much more goodies to come. So please click that link and check it out. Yeah, it's very fortunate for them.
Yeah,
And
but I think it was a good handling of the situation of two pretty influential people with a
yeah,
lot of
definitely.
sway. And
Um,
would you be surprised that Montgomery also managed to piss off Ramsey?
wouldn't surprise me. Montgomery's pissing off anybody.
Yeah, like this is not related to D-Day, but Montgomery just said we're just gonna take Antwerp and the supply situation's gonna solve itself. It was actually Ramsay and Admiral Cunningham who were literally telling, Shafe that, yeah, it's one thing to take the port from the land, but we need to clear out the access to it. And this is apparently, I think Bertram Ramsay said that the port was of no use while the German held the approaches, saying it would be of much use as Timbuktu. But, well, Montgomery got his way, so then the Allies had to spend quite a lot of resources to clear the approach to Antwerp because what
Mm-hmm.
Montgomery wants, Montgomery gets, unfortunately.
Yeah. There was some naval action involved in Operation Neptune, although honestly it's kind of small, but I will mention it. At about 5:10 a.m., German torpedo boats from the Eastern Task Force attacked off Sword Beach, firing about 15 torpedoes, and they did manage to sink the Norwegian destroyer HNOMS Svena. The German ships then withdrew to the east, aided by a smoke screen that was laid by the RAF to try and shield the fleet from, long-range guns at Le Havre. Allied mine losses would also include the American destroyer USS Corey off a Utah beach and the 53-meter patrol craft USS PC 1261. But yeah, it's very limited in scope when it comes to the naval actions. Uh, the outcomes, of course, was a fantastic operation that was very successful. There was also other things that were done, like there was naval rescue efforts to save thousands from drowning or from enemy fire. Over the course of many weeks.
I would actually say, I remember a British commando captain was saying they the seas before, right? Because these guys had to spend 24 hours plus on these assault craft during that delay. Some of the British soldiers were so successful in their attacks on Juno and Sword because they just did not want to go back onto that craft. So you better make the assault stick.
Definitely. Just the rough sea conditions actually caused havoc, especially at Omaha. There was a lot of
Mhm.
mislandings and there's friendly fire also that's never accounted for, right? Transporting, over the course of weeks, about like 2.5 million men and 500,000 vehicles are going to be transported by, I think, August. There was
It's
a.
no, I'm just saying it's just insane of the logistics that they planned.
Yep.
The
By
I would just
July.
say, yeah, you mentioned
No,
the
go for it.
Omaha mislandings, like the misidentified landings. You could say like no one landed where they were supposed to be. It actually
Yeah.
worked brilliantly at Utah Beach
Mhm.
because Utah was actually it's actually funny in a way that the Americans got literally the hardest and the easiest beach to assault
It's true.
because Utah Beach was the most successful of the 5 landings, whereas Omaha
Yep.
was the most brutal.
What was actually really brutal was capturing one of the key objectives was Sjöbog, which is a notable port city. Took
Uh,
till July to actually capture all of it, which would
yeah,
conclude the Neptune part of the operation.
yeah, but that is actually the reason why they had the Mulberry Harbors because they knew the Germans would
Yeah,
probably trash it and it would take months to repair it.
yeah,
I'm
because
just
you
gonna
needed
add a
a
little
port
bit
facility.
of when the U-boats also attacked from D-Day.
Hmm.
Like I think on like the Atlantic operations were sent out to confront Operation Neptune, but while you had these shore bombardment groups, the Allies at the English, like the part of the English Channel that opens into the North Sea and to the Atlantic, they had also stationed anti-submarine forces because the U-boats would be approaching either from Norway or from the Bay of Biscay in France. And the first phase from coming from the Atlantic was 8 of the many thousands of vessels that were participating were sunk by the U-boats at a cost of 13 U-boats. And like as the U-boats that are equipped now with the snorkels, hoping that they could evade the Allied air power and air coverage, they tried to attack in the second week of the invasion, and they lost 7 U-boats for sinking 2 ships. It
Yeah,
was just
it's
a
abysmal.
doomed effort. Between 16th May and 1st November, the Allies lost 12 small warships and 14 merchant ships to the U-boats for a total tonnage loss of about 60,000 tons. The cost was 72 U-boats.
Jeez, yeah, that's terrible, abysmal.
Yeah. And the Norwegian U-boats were just far and few in between because they just literally would not be able to reach. And there's actually, I think, in uh, 1942, as the news is tightening around France, right, for Nazi Germany, the bases of Lorient, Saint-Nazaire, and La Palisse were, by September, October, were completely evacuated. All the ships had, like U-boats, had sailed off to Norway. And very few attacks could go because now the British have way more air coverage. Because by the the second half of 1944, you now also have air bases on France. And you have the air bases in UK. And the biggest U-boat killer has always been the aircraft. And they just were not able to do anything. And even though they would later try to send some Type 9 U-boats, which are the long-range U-boats, to Canada around this time, which were equipped with the new radars, detectors, and a search radar called the Hohenthal. These Type 9s off the coast of Canada towards the end of the year of 1944. They only sank 6 warships and 9 merchant ships. My apologies. At a loss of 7 U-boats. Hardly worth it. And the Type 9 is way more costly, larger than the Type 7, which is the most common loss. And it was just pretty much just a futile effort. Right? Donans would continue these desperate patrols in 1945, where you'll have the Type 7 snorkel U-boats patrol the British waters from Norway to Germany. And 65 was sunk in the last few months in these waters. He had 19 U-boats actually sail for the Americas. And of this 19, 9 U-boats were sunk off the waters of America, sinking only 6 small warships and merchant ships. That was pretty much what happened. And actually by towards April 1945, sorry. Keep always forgetting the dates or when the Russians are advancing. The Baltic ports were also evacuated by the U-boats because they wanted to avoid capture from the Red Army. And Norway would see another 17 U-boats sink by Allied aircraft as they try to move to Norway. The last actions for the U-boats would take place on the 5th or 6th of May 1945, where 1 merchant ship and 2 U-boats were sunk in separate incidents. But the last actions of the entire campaign of the Battle of the Atlantic takes place on 7th to 8th of May 1945, when U-320 was sunk by an RAF Catalina flying boat. And another incident on the same day was the Norwegian minesweeper, and a couple of freighters were actually torpedoed before the German surrender. And after the surrender, 222 U-boats were actually scuttled by the crews, and the 174 U-boats that still remained in port were surrendered, and most were actually destroyed. But some served in the Allied navies. And Japan captured 6 U-boats because they were in Japan at the time. Because I guess the alliance technically ended, right? When Germany surrendered.
Yeah, technically, yeah.
But yeah, that was the action with the U-boats. I'm wondering, should we talk about a bit of the Tirpitz right now and the hunt for it before we get into the losses? Yeah. Would you like to lead that?
Yeah, sure. So here, I'm just going to bring up a map of kind of many of the places the Tirpitz ended up.
You mean where it hid?
Yeah, exactly. I guess you call it the hunt for the Tirpitz. It's a warship that was named after, of course, the famous German Admiral Alfred von Tirpitz. Not General.
Guys, we covered him in the Naval Arms Race episode of our podcast, so do check it out.
Oh yes, thoroughly. It was the largest battleship ever built by Nazi Germany, one of the most formidable warships of World War II. It was launched in 1939 as the sister ship to the infamous Bismarck, And the Tirpitz, displaced about 42,000 tons, stretched 251 meters long, is armed with 8 15-inch guns, making it, quite a threat to Allied naval operations if it ever did anything.
I
It's
actually found the fact that secondary armament was actually pretty extensive. Like you had 12 6-inch guns and 16 4.1-inch guns
yeah,
and 16 1.5-inch guns as well. So
yeah,
it was pretty good and pretty well armored. 320 millimeter belt armor and 360 millimeter turret armor. I'm pretty
yeah.
sure
I have a
something
picture up
that,
of it right now.
yeah, I'm pretty sure HMS Hood would have preferred that kind of armor.
Yeah, I had a family member on that ship that went down with it. So yeah,
I'm sorry about that.
nah, it's all good. It's a great uncle or something. Actually, I'm literally in the process of doing an ancestry.com thing because I would love to know the name of this person. My family cannot find any records of him, but yeah. So here's a picture of the famous Tirpitz, very famous warship.
The only greatest accomplishment the Tirpitz ever had in the war was the amount of ordnance and resources the British
Dedicated to
wasted
killing it.
in trying to get this ship. That's
Yeah,
the
so we're
only
gonna
thing
get
I'm
into
going to
it.
tell.
Yeah, so as you're alluding to, the mere presence of the Tirpitz in what was known as the Norwegian fjords tied down a lot of Allied resources, earning it the moniker the Lonely Queen of the North. The Allies' relentless
It's,
pursuit to neutralize it became known as the Hunt for the Tirpitz, a campaign blending daring raids, innovative technology, and sheer persistence from 1941 to 1944.
and I think I'll just add this like the threat was really great, or like the fear that the British Admiralty had for the Tirpitz. For
Yeah,
actually convoy PQ-70, there was a pretty strong covering force which had a fleet carrier, two battleships, and several heavy cruisers with their destroyer escorts. They were not with the main convoy of PQ-17 and its escorts, but they were close enough.
yeah,
And
yeah.
they got intelligence that the Tirpitz is weighing anchor and preparing to move. And Admiral Sir Dudley Pound just panicked and recalled his forces instead of wanting to engage the Tirpitz. And that actually led to the destruction of PQ-17.
Hmm.
And it is true, the Tirpitz did weigh anchor to just go to a new fjord.
Exactly. So the Tirpitz' strategic value was just the potential it had for disrupting Allied convoys, supplying the Soviet Union via the Arctic route. It would be stationed across all the fjords in Norway after the Bismarck sinking in May of 1941. And, it was constant menace, even though it never really shot a single fire at any Allied ships. British Prime Minister Sir Winston Churchill famously prioritized its destruction, declaring it, quote, the greatest single menace in our sea communications. I mean, it's ridiculous. I think the lengths they went to going after the ship. The
I think
Royal
maybe I'll
Navy, the Royal.
just. I'm going to list out some of the operations that that the British mounted to get rid of the Tirpitz in that time frame.
Just, yeah,
Between,
sure, list them.
yeah, between 1940 and 42, they had conventional bombing and 15 plus raids to bomb the Tirpitz, and all missed because that time bomb aiming was not that great, and the weather in this area of the world wasn't really good. Then
Mm.
October 1942, you have an operation called Operation Title, where you had manned torpedoes or chariots gone, and the torpedoes were kind of hidden under the fishing boat and broke during a storm. So yeah, nothing happened. September 1943, you saw the first, maybe real success, you could call it, against the Tirpitz, called Operation Source, where a midget submarine, which is an X-craft, it slipped in under the nets and laid mines, and that explosion lifted and blew up a turret section, and it disabled the Tirpitz for 6 months.
Mm.
I'm pretty sure by the end, because this is actually one of the reasons why the Scharnhorst was actually sent for the Battle of the North Cape and not Tirpitz, because, well, it was still being repaired. Then you had Operation Tungsten in April 1944, where the British launched a carrier airstrike where 40 Barracuda aircraft, score 14 hits on it. They kill about 122 crew, but the armor wasn't pierced. It's just superficial damage. Unfortunately, these
Yeah.
small bombs from the aircraft may not always just do anything to, the big armor ships. Then you had the Goodwood raids in August 1944, which is like another set of four carrier strikes. And the German smokescreen defenses around the Tirpitz did wonders, which the British hit nothing and lost 17 bombers. Then you have Operation Paravane, which was in September
Oh, this
1944,
one was crazy. Yeah.
where it was like the Lancasters from Russia hit it with a tall boy, making her unseaworthy. And then in November 1944, Operation Catchism, where the 32 Lancasters dropped tall boys,
Tall
which
boys,
caused
which
it.
are insane 12,000-pound bombs. These are monster bombs.
I think they were called literally, yeah, and the explosive is literally 2.4 kgs. Sorry,
It
2.4
was crazy.
tons. One sec. I got this comparison image. I think this is why people need to see this. This is the tall boy. It really is a tall boy.
Yeah.
As you can see, it was, if I'm not mistaken, it was actually called the earthquake bomb. And
Yes, it was known as a
you could
earthquake bomb.
not, even a standard Avro Lancaster could not take it. It literally required modifications to be able to mount it. Now, honestly, if I were talking about, pretty interesting bombs, I really love the skipping bombs that the Allies had for, breaking the dams. Those were, I think, the best.
Yeah, those are really
But
cool.
maybe we could just talk about the last two operations, because that was the death blows to the Tirpitz.
Mhm.
So when we had Operation Paravane, it took place on the 15th of September, where 23 Lancasters, which had 17 of them were carrying a tall boy and 6 were carrying 12 mines. They scored a single hit on the ship's bow, and they actually flew from Zaunkönig in Russia, so they were coming at a completely different angle of approach. And that tall boy penetrated the ship, exited the keel, and exploded in the bottom of the fjord. These tall boys were something else.
They were supposed to be
And
kind of bunker busters, so it makes sense. Yeah.
yeah, I think they were actually designed to directly just penetrate and break through the U-boat pens in the Bay of Biscay and all, because those were pretty well fortified complexes, so makes sense. And the bow was flooded with almost 1,000 tons of water, and it caused a serious forward trim. The ship was limited to like a speed of 8 to 10 knots and unseaworthy. The concussive shock caused severe damage to fire control equipment, and that was the death blow, you could say, operationally for the Tirpitz, because the naval command just decided that this ship has no value whatsoever as a ship. It's just a floating gun platform, which in a sense that's pretty much what it was all its life. At least the Yamato at least sailed into combat. So, just saying.
No, true.
And the repair work, holy, you got to guess, Greg, how long would it have taken to actually repair the Tirpitz from that attack?
A year?
Close, 9 months.
9 months. Okay.
And it would still take a few weeks just to patch the holes. Yeah, it was a pretty devastating attack. And then I think it was on 15th October, about a month later, the ship made a 200 nautical mile trip to the Torsmo under her own power, which was the final voyage of its career.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had Operation Catechism, which is the final attack on 12th of November.
Yeah.
The ship actually used her 15-inch guns against the bombers. And the bombers, they did disperse because, well, a 15-inch gun firing at you is a pretty scary thought.
That's terrifying. Yeah.
Yeah. And we had a force of 32 Lancasters from the number 9 and 617 squadron drop 29 tall boys, scoring
Oh my
2
god.
direct hits and 1 near miss. And,
Killed like
several other
1,000
bombs
people.
landed within the anti-torpedo net and actually
Oof.
caused a significant catering of the seabed. And that was actually very important because the seabed was now destroyed, which was deliberately selected for the mooring of the ship because of the previous attack, which caused her to list, and this is to avoid the capsizing of the ship. Now I got a better image. And
There
the
she
second
is.
hit was, it just blew apart the armor belt abreast where the bomb hit. And maybe they said a third may have struck the turret Caesar. And then this actually caused the port side listing of 15 to 20 degrees. 10 minutes later, it was a 30 to 40 degrees, and then the abandoned ship was given. Right? And this was literally 15 minutes after the attack of the Lancasters from the number 9 and 617 squadrons. And at 9:58 a.m., a large explosion rocks one of the turret Caesar. So I don't know what was its exact position, but it would be one of the 4 main turrets of the Germans, like on the German battleship. And the turret roof and a part of the rotating structure was literally blown up almost 100 feet into the air. And unfortunately, it fell on some of the crew that was trying to swim away, crushing them. Yeah, ouch. And in the aftermath, 82 men were trapped in the hull and were rescued. And yeah, it did capsize and sink, with the death toll estimated of being of 950 to 1,200 men. And the men actually the survivors actually transferred to continue serving on the Lutzow. But that was the end of the Queen of the North, as you called it, the ship that never chose to engage. But that does bring us to the end of the hunt for the Tirpitz. Now, maybe we could just talk a little bit of the Battle of the
Hmm.
Atlantic's losses, because it was
Sure.
a pretty grueling campaign. You know, the British. It was estimated that the Germans lost about 30,000 sailors aboard the U-boats and the various surface raiders that took part in the battle, while the Italians lost about 500 men. The Germans in total lost about almost 800 U-boats and about 47 other warships, whereas the Reggio Marina, in attribution to the Battle of the Atlantic, lost 17 submarines. They never, because their other losses were technically considered part of the Battle of the Mediterranean with the Royal Navy, so it's not going to be counted here. The Allies, on the other hand, they had around 3,600 merchant navy sailors killed, and a similar number also on the various warships. For example, like HMS Hood would have seen, like, I think 1,400 of that death toll from that one vessel alone. They lost 175 warships, 741 coastal command aircraft, and over 3,500 merchant ships. That was the cost for the Allies. But this was still the most important theater of, like, supplies in the throughout the entire war. The Allies lost about 21.6 million tons of shipping, and from the Axis forces. So this is including Italy, Japan, and Germany. It's also going to be including attacks by submarines, by aircraft, by mine, by surface ships, and everything, right? So I guess Bismarck will also count in this. And of the 21.5 million tons that were lost, almost 17 million came in the Atlantic. So Atlantic was the theater. Even though the Japanese did lose a lot of ships to the United States in the Pacific, it just feels like it's
Yeah.
nothing compared. I don't think the losses are even the same.
No, there's no comparison.
Yeah, and the submarine was the greatest weapon for Allied shipping against Allied shipping, with more than two-thirds of the total tonnage sunk coming from the submarines. Then actually you did have aircraft and surface ships being like, in 2 and 3. And they did take over 3,000 vessels. The Germans, however, they only killed 187 enemy vessels with the surface raiders. That is including the auxiliary cruiser Atlantis, and auxiliary cruiser Penguin, which together sunk 50 vessels for about 300,000 tons of shipping. Pretty impressive. Admiral Scheer, 17 kills. Then you had the Admiral Graf Spee, which had 9 killings, and the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau also sank 22 vessels. So I don't know. Bismarck would have I guess you could just give it a HMS Hood.
Pretty much.
But the German surface raiders only had 187 ships. On the other hand, in the U-boat section, the U-boats lost over 782 vessels, and they only were able to combat back against 175 Allied warships. It did include some very notable targets. I think one being, not sure which was the exact aircraft name. Was it HMS Illustrious or Glorious or Eagle? Like that was the first fleet carrier in the world sunk by by a submarine torpedo. And fleet carriers are massive investments.
Oh yes.
But yeah, so I guess it was a brutal slogging match. But ultimately, what prevailed was not only the Allied material advantage, but definite better use of their resources as well. They got the right commanders at the right place and more importantly, had support from the higher brass more often than not. Because I will say this: the Kriegsmarine had a very competent guy in Admiral Karl Donitz. He realized what was the strengths and what could have been done. The problem is Hitler and Admiral Eric Raeder, they just were not going to back him. And once he finally got the backing and the leeway to do what he wanted with expanding his U-boat arm, by the
It
time
was
it was
too
too
late.
late. I mean, if he had his 100 operational U-boats in the Atlantic by summer of 1940 instead of having a total force of 50, who knows? It could have been a
Yep.
pretty difficult time for Britain, because you got to also credit Britain's planning team. The Dig for Victory campaign, the way they already had stockpiled tractors for cultivation of unused land, using the local farmers to help in the growing and optimal use of crops, and actually just trying to grow simple crops and non-competing ones, so that the crops for food and the crops used for livestock and everything, they don't compete with each other for the land and resources. Britain was the only country in Europe that actually increased its rations throughout the war. I think the most underrated statement you could ever say. But yeah,
Absolutely.
Craig, this brings us to the end of the Battle of the Atlantic.
Yeah, this concludes the Battle of the Atlantic. Whoa, that was
Um,
loud.
I'm
All
sorry.
good. I just wanted to say before we let the audience go, please, again, I implore you to check us out on YouTube. We might actually be on another channel for this episode. I'll keep everyone posted about that. There might be some changes going on. And of course, if you'd like to further support us, please consider checking out the YouTube membership or our Patreon account at www.patreon.com/the Pacific War Channel. By joining either of these, you get access to the exclusive podcast series. You get early access to all the content I make and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. Again, a big thanks to Gaurav. Thank you for taking us across this journey. And until next time.
Thanks, Rick. Great to really enjoyed talking about the series since it's been a passion campaign of mine. So thanks for listening to me rant about U-boats, tactics, anti-submarine warfare, weapons, and getting to also fanboy for some of my favorite escort commanders in Donald McIntyre more than Johnny Walker. Yep, I said that I prefer Donald McIntyre.
All right, you heard it here first.